The Quiet House. Part 1. Stillness. When Anna left Daniel, it wasn't with a bang but a silence that filled their apartment like smoke. She packed her things in the middle of the night. 1 suitcase, 2 boxes, no tears. The city didn't watch her go, and neither did he. She closed the door behind her like closing a chapter too worn out to read again. The farmhouse had been waiting. It stood alone at the edge of a rural road, overgrown and shivering in its own shade. The grass had yellowed and grown brittle, the trees surrounding it crooked like old fingers. She'd inherited it from an aunt she'd only met once, a woman who died alone with the curtains drawn and the doors locked from the inside. Anna didn't care about the history. She needed distance, not comfort. She needed a place untouched by the sound of Daniel's sighs, by the ghosts of love worn too thin. Here, in the quiet, she would remember how to exist. She arrived under gray skies, and didn't notice the silence until the car engine stopped. Not the kind of silence that came from peace. This one had edges, like it was listening. The wind didn't move the trees. No birds called from the forest. Only the crunch of gravel under her boots as she walked to the porch. The key turned easily. The door opened. The house swallowed her whole. There was dust, of course. Cobwebs. Stale air. She opened all the windows on the first day, letting the house breathe again. It felt like opening a chest that had been underwater too long. The walls creaked, and the air shifted slowly, like lungs inflating. There were no mirrors. She hadn't noticed right away, but by the second evening, it became impossible to ignore. No bathroom mirror. None in the upstairs hallway. The bedroom closets had bare wood panels where mirrors had once been affixed. She found a broken shard tucked in the bottom drawer of the old dresser. Just one. Just enough to show her one eye when she held it up. It made her feel watched, even as she stared at herself. At night, the house changed shape. Not visibly. But it felt different, as though it settled deeper into the ground, becoming heavier with each passing hour of darkness. The floorboards didn't creak under her steps, as they did during the day. They waited. That's how it felt. The house was waiting for something. She started sleeping in the guest room. It was small, tucked into the far corner of the house, with only one narrow window, and a lamp that buzzed faintly when turned on. The main bedroom upstairs remained untouched. That was where Aunt Margaret had died. There was still a stain on the floor beneath the bed. Anna told herself it was water damage. She stopped going upstairs after dusk. 3 days passed. She made tea. She scrubbed the floors. She unpacked one of the 2 boxes. The other remained sealed. It held photos from the wedding, and a scarf Daniel had given her when they were still pretending to try. She had meant to throw it all out, but grief doesn't move in straight lines. Sometimes you save things just to remind yourself what you survived. The wind picked up that night. Not enough to howl, just enough to whisper. It brushed the outside walls of the house, like fingertips trailing behind a thought. She woke to a tapping sound on the window, and found nothing there. Just the woods, still as ever. The trees no longer looked crooked. They looked like they were leaning closer. By the end of the first week, she started keeping notes. Scraps of thoughts written in the margins of grocery lists, the backs of receipts. Observations. Feelings. Little things. The shadows in the hallway stretch longer than they should. I can hear footsteps in the attic, but I haven't opened the hatch. When I stand in the living room too long, I feel like someone is standing behind me. She wrote them to prove to herself that she wasn't going crazy. That these were real things. That the house was more than wood and foundation. That it was listening, remembering, breathing. On the 8th day, she woke to find the other bedroom door open. She hadn't gone up the stairs in days. But the door was open, wide, and the light was on. She turned it off without stepping inside. That night, The buzzing lamp wouldn't turn on. The silence had changed. It was thicker now. Less like peace, more like breath held too long. She slept on the couch. A week later, the first photo appeared. It was in the kitchen drawer, tucked beneath a handful of rusted cutlery. Black and white, curled at the corners. A picture of her, unmistakably younger, smiling. Her hair was long in the photo, the way she used to wear it before the weight of marriage made her cut it short. Beside her stood a man. It wasn't Daniel. He was dressed like Daniel. Same denim jacket. Same slight slouch in posture. But his face was wrong. Stretched in strange places. The smile too wide. The eyes too dull. And yet, familiar. As if someone had drawn Daniel from memory and gotten everything just a little bit off. She stared at the photo for a long time. Then she put it in the trash. The next morning, it was back in the drawer. She stopped sleeping entirely by the end of the second week. The house didn't permit rest anymore. Every time she closed her eyes, she'd see the man in the photo standing at the foot of the bed. Not doing anything. Not moving. Just watching. Waiting. Sometimes, she saw him out the window. Between the trees. The woods were closer now. She hadn't noticed them moving. But they pressed up against the edges of the yard, like they wanted in. She found a note under her door one morning. It wasn't her handwriting. You brought him with you. You always do. Anna began to forget the sound of Daniel's voice. And in its place, she began to remember something else. A low hum. A murmur just beneath the floor. A feeling she couldn't name. The house didn't want her to leave. And part of her, quietly, didn't want to go. End of part 1. Part 2. The unraveling. The house was quieter now. Not peaceful, just quiet in that heavy, dismal way where each creaking floorboard or ticking clock feels intrusive. Laura sat at the kitchen table most mornings, staring at the steam rising from her coffee, letting it curl and vanish, just like the dream she'd once had for her marriage. It had been 2 weeks since Mark left. He'd taken his essentials, suitcase, laptop, a few clothes, and left the rest behind like a ghost still tethered to the space. His toothbrush still sat in the bathroom. His scent lingered on the sheets. The closet, half empty, felt more accusatory than vacant. Laura didn't cry much, which surprised her. Instead, a numbness settled in. A gentle, constant fog. She was going through the motions, work, groceries, checking the mail, answering texts with mechanical politeness. But inside her, something had cracked. Not from the breakup itself, but from what it revealed, that maybe she had been alone for a very long time before Mark ever walked out the door. They used to be in sync. Their conversations, their laughter, the small rituals, the Sunday morning pancakes, the Friday wine nights on the couch, the unspoken understanding of each other's quirks. But those rituals had eroded over time. At first, gently, imperceptibly. Then with the force of a landslide. The real turning point had been last spring. Mark had started coming home later from work. He blamed meetings, traffic, deadlines. Laura believed him at first. Then came the change in tone, the way he avoided her eyes, how his phone was always face down on the table. She didn't want to be the suspicious wife, didn't want to play detective. But some nights, the silence between them was louder than any confession. She never caught him in a lie. He never admitted anything. And maybe there was nothing to admit, nothing tangible. But the emotional absence was undeniable. Mark wasn't with her anymore, even when he sat across the table. He was gone long before he packed his bags. When he finally said the words, "I think we should separate," they hit with the weight of inevitability. Laura didn't argue. There were no tears or screaming matches. Just a quiet nod and a deep, sinking acceptance. Now, every room in the house seemed to echo memories like old, flickering films. Their wedding photo in the hallway. The bookshelf they built together. The garden she tended while he watched football, occasionally glancing up to smile at her. And yet, even in the grief, there was a strange sense of clarity. Of freedom. Not relief, not yet, but space. A new, terrifying openness where something new might eventually grow. Laura started keeping a journal. Just a few lines each day. Today, I went for a walk. The sun was too bright. I didn't wear sunglasses. I don't know why. I threw out his shampoo. It felt petty, but also necessary. I wonder if he's lonely, or if he already found someone. I keep forgetting to buy milk. The journaling didn't heal her, but it gave shape to the chaos. It helped her notice things, like the way her neighbor's dog barked at the same time every morning, or how the ivy had started creeping up the back fence again. Life, it seemed, was still happening. On a cold Tuesday in October, Laura found herself sitting in the attic, sifting through old boxes. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Maybe some form of proof that her life had meaning before Mark, or could have meaning after. She opened a box labeled Laura College. Inside were old notebooks, photographs, sketchpads. A painting she had started but never finished. A screenplay idea she once thought was brilliant but now felt naive. She smiled. It was a real smile. Somewhere between the past and the present, between grief and rediscovery, Laura realized she had been asleep for years. Not in a literal sense, but emotionally. As though she had slipped into a role, the good wife, the patient partner, the reliable support, and forgotten her own script. Now, there was no script, only blank pages. And that, terrifying as it was, also meant possibility. Part 3. The Hollow Rooms. The house felt different now. Once brimming with a quiet hum of life, it had become an echo chamber of what used to be. The refrigerator still buzzed in the kitchen. The heater clicked softly in the evenings. But no matter how many familiar sounds remained, they only served to accentuate the absence that lingered in every room. Eleanor's toothbrush was gone from the cup in the bathroom. Her favorite sweater no longer hung over the chair she always draped it on. Even the smell of her, rosewater and cinnamon, had begun to fade, replaced by the dry, scentless presence of isolation. Daniel found himself drifting, not just through the house, but through time. He would pause in doorways and stare at empty spaces, remembering moments that once filled them. Eleanor reading with her legs tucked beneath her on the couch, her laugh carrying from the kitchen as she spoke to her sister on the phone. The sound of her slippers dragging slightly as she walked half asleep toward the bathroom at midnight. He began avoiding the bedroom altogether. The bed felt too large now, every pillow and sheet a reminder of how small he'd become in her absence. He started sleeping on the couch with the TV on, static voices and old documentaries giving him a sense that he wasn't truly alone. But the silence found him, even there. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, he came home to find the front door slightly ajar. Panic rose briefly in his chest, but as he stepped inside, everything appeared untouched. No signs of intrusion. No valuables missing. Just the door open. He closed it firmly, turned the lock, and checked the rest of the house. Nothing unusual. But that night, he dreamed of Eleanor. Not how she was, but how she left. The dream repeated itself in slow motion, her turning her head to look at him one last time before walking out the door, her face blurred, unreadable. And behind her, something else. Something watching. He woke up drenched in sweat, heart racing. A dream, he reminded himself. Just a dream. But as the days passed, things began to shift, subtle at first, then more jarring. He'd hear the floorboards creak upstairs while he was in the kitchen. His phone would buzz with a notification only to find nothing there. The mirror in the bathroom would be fogged up when he hadn't used hot water. And once, he came home to find the bed in the master bedroom made perfectly. Pillows fluffed, sheets tucked tightly. The way Eleanor used to do it. He hadn't set foot in that room in over a month. Part of him thought he was losing his grip, that the divorce was playing games with his psyche. He'd read about trauma-induced hallucinations, stress manifesting as distorted perceptions of reality. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just in his head. He started to hear whispers. At first, just as he was drifting off to sleep, a soft murmur, like someone speaking in the room beside him. But as time passed, the whispers grew clearer, more distinct. They said things like, "She's not gone. You let it in. She was trying to protect you." One night, after a particularly loud whisper jolted him awake, something had hissed his name right into his ear. Daniel snapped. He stormed through the house, turning on every light, opening every door, yelling into the empty rooms. "Enough! I don't know what you are or what you want, but this ends now." But silence was the only reply. That night, he gathered every photo of Eleanor, every item of hers that remained, and packed them into a cardboard box. He drove to a storage unit across town and locked them away. Out of sight, out of mind. He hoped that would end it. But it only got worse. The dreams returned, but this time Eleanor wasn't just leaving, she was warning him. Her face no longer blurred, but distorted with fear. "It's in the house," she said. "I kept it away, but now it's free." Daniel began avoiding the house altogether. He'd stay at work late, drive aimlessly, spend hours in coffee shops doing nothing but scrolling his phone. Anything to delay going home. Because home was no longer safe. It was watching him. Waiting. Something had changed when Eleanor left, not just in their relationship, but in the very walls of the house. It was as if whatever had been buried beneath years of routine and shared laughter had been released, untethered by her departure. And now, it was coming for him. Part 3. Months passed. The crisp winds of autumn began to curl around the house, scattering red and gold leaves across the porch, like confetti from a celebration long forgotten. In that house, Claire found herself again, not the version that had shrunk beneath the weight of compromise, not the woman who had twisted herself to fit into shapes more acceptable to Daniel, but someone raw and new. The mornings became rituals of quiet empowerment. She would rise early, brew coffee, and sit at the window overlooking the woods, notebook in hand. Words poured out of her like a dam finally cracked open. Stories she had long suppressed. Pain she had never named. Hopes she had never admitted even to herself. The town, small and tightly woven, had begun to notice her in new ways. Some people looked at her with pity, the woman whose husband left. Others, especially the older women, watched her with a kind of solemn approval, as if recognizing a sister survivor. But Claire didn't care much for their eyes. She had her own reflection to contend with now. She joined a writing group at the local library. Once a week, they met in the back room surrounded by old paperbacks and the scent of dust. She was the youngest among them, but her stories, raw, aching, visceral, commanded attention. There, she wasn't just Claire who had been left. She was Claire, the writer. Claire, the observer. Claire, who turned her pain into prose. Daniel, meanwhile, became a distant echo. He tried, once, to rekindle something, sent her a long, meandering email about how lonely city life had become, about how he missed the way she made tea, the way her laugh felt like autumn sunlight. Claire read it twice, then deleted it. The power wasn't in the rejection, it was in the silence that followed. Around the holidays, she began to decorate the house again. Not for anyone else. Just for herself. strings of warm lights curled around the banister. Pine cones and cinnamon sticks filled the air with the memory of simpler childhood winters. It was healing. Not a scream of triumph, but a quiet, determined whisper. "I'm still here." Her therapist had once said healing was not linear, and Claire knew that intimately now. Some days, the grief ambushed her, sudden, sharp, like the memory of his hand in hers during the trip to the lake house, or the way he used to hum off-key in the shower. But other days were light, liberated, whole. She began submitting her stories to literary magazines. Most were rejected. A few were published. She framed the first acceptance letter and hung it in the hallway, where Daniel's diploma had once been. Claire was no longer a shadow in her own story. And she knew, somehow, that this was just the beginning. Part 5. The Letter Never Sent. Daniel had always hated routine. He claimed to thrive in chaos, that it sparked his best ideas. But since the divorce, his chaos had become a prison of repetition. Every morning started with the same cold shower, the same black coffee, the same 12 steps from the kitchen to the broken chair by the window. He would sit for hours, watching a street that changed even less than he did. He didn't know why he had kept the letter. It wasn't even finished. The handwriting sloped downward, tired. The paper, once crisp, now curled at the edges, like it had aged with him. It started with a lie. "I'm doing better now." He wasn't. He hadn't been for a long time. The apartment was more haunted than ever. Not by ghosts, but by versions of himself that existed only in fragments. The man he was with Eleanor, the husband he had tried to be, the person he had never become. There were nights when he sat on the floor, sifting through old notebooks, searching for words that might save him. Words he had written when he still believed he could write. When his mind wasn't so crowded. One notebook held a page that stopped him cold. "A real ending doesn't come with silence. It comes with something you were too afraid to say." He read it over and over. The next day, he walked 5 blocks to a tiny bookstore he hadn't visited in years. The owner, a thin woman named Joyce who had once introduced him to Vonnegut, didn't recognize him at first. When she finally did, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "You still writing?" He lied again. "Always." Daniel bought a new journal. Leather-bound. Blank pages. It felt heavy with potential, or maybe guilt. He took it to a coffee shop he used to frequent with Claire. It hadn't changed. Neither had the coffee. Burnt bitter. But the notebook was warm in his hands. And that's when he started the real letter. This time he didn't begin with a lie. He began with an apology. He wrote for hours. He wrote through the sunset, through the arrival of rain, through the song on repeat that he didn't even notice. He didn't write to get her back. He didn't write to explain himself. He wrote because somewhere in the middle of all the ruin, there had to be a voice that still remembered what it meant to feel human. "Claire, I once thought silence was strength, that not needing closure made me invincible. But silence only makes cowards of people who could have been honest." He wrote about the nights he woke up thinking she was still there. The mornings he stayed in bed because facing a world without her seemed like trying to breathe underwater. He wrote about the day she left, the weight of the door closing, the air that rushed in afterward like a vacuum. "You were always better at endings," he wrote. He didn't sign it. He didn't need to. And when he folded the letter, he didn't seal it. He placed it on the table, looked out the window, and let it stay there, like a part of himself he was finally willing to let go of. But somewhere across the city, in an old apartment now filled with light and journals and hope, Claire opened her mailbox. And inside was nothing. Just bills. A flyer. Not the letter. Not yet. But somehow, she paused. She looked over her shoulder, as if she'd just been written about. Part 6. Closure. The house felt colder than it used to, not because of the weather, but because of the weight of absence. After the storm of emotions, courtroom battles, and endless nights of doubt, silence had finally arrived, not as an enemy, but as a companion. Samantha stood in the kitchen one morning, clutching a coffee mug with both hands, watching the steam curl into the air like whispers of what used to be. The papers were signed. The last thread of legality was severed. What remained were only echoes of laughter that once filled the halls, of arguments that scarred the walls, of love that had mutated into memory. David had moved out weeks ago. The house no longer carried his cologne, nor the thud of his boots when he came home. The space felt larger now, emptier, but strangely peaceful. Emma, their daughter, had adjusted better than either of them expected. Children, it seemed, had a unique resilience, not to pain, but to change. She no longer asked when Daddy was coming back. Instead, she decorated her bedroom with new posters and had started journaling, a habit she said helped her sort her feelings. Samantha had begun rebuilding. Not her marriage, that ship had long sunk, but herself. She'd started going to therapy, not out of desperation, but out of a yearning to understand who she was before she became wife and mother. She painted again. Her hands remembered the strokes. Her heart remembered the peace. She had coffee with friends she hadn't seen in years. She read books that weren't about parenting or relationships. She even laughed again, not just the kind you offer in social settings, but the unguarded, unfiltered kind. One night, while watching the rain fall against the windowpane, Samantha wrote a letter. Not to David, not even to Emma, but to herself. "I forgive you," she wrote, "for staying too long, for hoping too hard, for breaking silently, for healing slowly. I forgive you. And I love who you're becoming." She folded the letter and tucked it into the back of her journal. It wasn't a happy ending. Life rarely offered those in the form people expect. But it was an honest one. And perhaps that was better. Because some endings aren't meant to be tragic or triumphant. Some are simply quiet acknowledgments that something is over, and something new, something unknown, has just begun. As she turned off the lights and walked up the stairs to Emma's room to say goodnight, she didn't feel broken anymore. She felt whole, just differently. And that, at long last, was enough.